Have you ever stopped to think about who really decides what you eat? I'm not talking about the chef at your favorite restaurant or the manager at your local grocery store. I mean the massive, unseen forces that control the global flow of food. For decades, they've operated in the shadows. But today, the entire map of global trade is being redrawn, and it's happening right under our noses. We're going to dive into these huge shifts all through the lens of a fantastic book by Jonathan Kingsman called Out of the Shadows. So, this book is basically a critical update to a classic from 40 years ago called Merchants of Grain. And let me tell you, the world Kingsman describes today is, well, it's almost unrecognizable from the way things were back in 1979. We've gone from a pretty straightforward Cold War chessboard to a whole new, much more complicated game. Just let that sink in for a second. That cereal you had for breakfast, the bread for your sandwich at lunch, even the feed for the chicken you might have for dinner, it's almost guaranteed to have passed through the hands of a very small, very powerful group of companies. Their influence is absolutely massive, yet they're practically invisible to most of us. And this right here gives you a really clear picture of just how far their reach goes. I mean, next time you walk through a supermarket, think about this. A staggering 40% of the items you see contain corn in some form, and a full 50% contain palm oil. These are the fundamental building blocks of the modern food system, and this is the world these trading giants dominate. Okay, so who are these giants? In the industry, they're often just called the ABCD group, plus a few other major players. You can think of them as the gatekeepers of the world's calories. What's so fascinating here is the sheer scale, but also the mix of players. You've got your traditional, privately owned American behemoths like Cargill. Look at that, moving 140 million tons of goods and pulling in over $100 billion a year. But then you've got a totally different kind of player, a state-owned enterprise like China's COFCO. And they're not just playing for profit. They're playing for national strategy. We're talking about revenues in the tens, even hundreds of billions. This isn't just a list of companies, it's a list of global powers. And you know, the rise of a player like Kafko is really just one part of a much bigger story. The entire map of who buys and who sells the world's food has been completely and totally rewritten over the last 40 years. So back in 1979, the game was pretty simple. You had the US on one side and the Soviet Union on the other. But then everything started to change. China joined the WTO and its demand just exploded. Biofuels suddenly became a massive new market for crops, and more recently, of course, trade wars threw a giant wrench into the whole system. This comparison really nails the first huge shift. In the 70s, the big, shocking story was the Soviet Union's secretive Great Grain Robbery. But today, the story is China. And China's demand isn't a one-time shock. It's this permanent, structural force that's driven by a massive and growing appetite for animal feed. Just look at that number, a 10,000% increase. It's almost hard to comprehend. As hundreds of millions of people in China moved to cities and their incomes grew, their diets changed. They started eating more meat. And to produce just 1 kilo of beef, you need about 7 kilos of grain. China simply couldn't grow enough, so it had to buy it, becoming the world's single biggest customer and reshaping global agriculture forever. Now for the second massive shift. The old Soviet Union, which was once the biggest importer of grain, has done a complete 180. The entire Black Sea region, especially Russia and Ukraine, has transformed itself into a grain exporting powerhouse. In fact, it's become the world's largest supplier of wheat. It's a comeback story that basically nobody saw coming. So, on top of these huge geographic shifts, there's a whole new demand puzzle that's emerged. All of a sudden, crops aren't just for eating anymore. This is what folks in the industry call the trilemma, and it's a really big deal. For the first time in history, farmers and traders have to balance three massive sources of demand: food for people, feed for animals, and now, fuel for our cars. This third element, fuel, is a total game changer. And if you want to see what that looks like in the real world, just look at the U.S. corn crop, one of the most important staple crops on the planet. A huge 40% of it, 40%, is no longer used for food or animal feed. It's being turned into ethanol and pumped right into our gas tanks. And this is the really crucial part. For the very first time, this creates a powerful and kind of dangerous link. It means the price of your cornflakes is now directly tied to the price of crude oil. It just adds a whole new layer of volatility and risk into an already complex global food system. Which brings us to the final and maybe the most unpredictable piece of the puzzle in this new world: politics. You see, pure market economics, they're just not in the driver's seat anymore. This quote from a veteran trader at ADM really says it all. The old rules just don't apply. People who spent their entire careers learning to predict weather patterns and crop yields now have to become political analysts just to do their jobs. And that's the absolute heart of it right there. A single tweet from a world leader can reroute billions of dollars worth of grain, it can shatter supply chains that took decades to build, and it can literally change the fortunes of farmers and entire nations overnight. A top executive at Cargill puts it even more bluntly. He says it turns the business of trading, which is all about managing calculated risk, into pure gambling. I mean, when the rules of the game can change without any warning, how can you possibly make a plan? So, where does all this leave these giant companies? In this new, unpredictable world, are they still the stable toll booth operators on the highway of food? Or have they become high-risk casinos themselves? This is the new reality. Supply chains can snap because of one political decision. And this is where state-owned players like China's COFCO have a huge strategic advantage. Think about it. A public company like ADM or Bunge has to answer to its shareholders every 3 months. But COFCO? It answers to Beijing. It can take a loss on a trade if it means securing a long-term food supply for its country. The goal shifts from simply chasing the best profit margin to making sure a nation doesn't go hungry. So we're left with this really critical question. In a world where geopolitics can rewrite the rules at any moment, are these invisible giants the essential arteries that keep all of us fed? Or have their own positions become so unstable that they now represent one of the biggest risks in our entire food system? The truth is, the answer is anything but clear.